afternoon. I'm Livia Profeti. I'm an Italian researcher from University of Rouen in France, and I'm going directly to my speech. Because the research I'm briefly presenting to you today is based on my conviction that one of the most important tasks of our time is to tackle a problem whose challenges the law of non-contradiction. That is, understanding and combining the equality among all human beings with the diversity which, at the same time, characterize them. Technology and globalization have dissolved the many geographic and cultural borders, and they have opened wide the door to the relationship with diversity. Confronted with such powerful stimuli, the modern conviction about equality is faltering. Xenophobia and racism, which are resurfacing in Western societies, add fuel to the flames of the economic crisis and are at the root of the attempt by several governments to raise new walls. The effort by the modern age to claim the political equality, supported by the metaphor of a common human nature, is denied today by several cultural movements and trends of philosophy. By way of example, I can mention the communitarian movements such as those of Hélène de Benoist in France or Alexander Dugin in Russia, but also the vast plexus of postmodern philosophers. Their rejection of universalism is inevitably reflected on the identity issue. The communitarian movements postulate a plurality of ethnic identities related to different people, while postmodern philosophers postulate a plurality of sociocultural identities of belonging. The identity issue that seems to divide these two currents of thought indeed unites them in the double negation of equality and subjectivity, both based on Heidegger's ontology. Actually, physical equality has been demonstrated in the 20th century by Luigi Cavalli's Forza research, according to which there are more genetic variation within a single ethnic group than across different populations. At the same time, it is also undisputable that, based on this fundamental physical equality, human beings are very different with regard to their complex psychic sphere, from languages to social habits. So, in the contemporary age, the diversity increasingly shows itself as a kind of hidden law about human relationships that, however, seems to contradict its sister law of equality, on which the coexistence among human beings has been always implicitly based. The two modern conceptions of equality, the one based on the universal reason of the Enlightenment and the one based on the production of subsistent meaning according to Marxism, have brought about a great human flourishing, but they do not seem to be suitable for dealing with the contemporary challenges anymore. While Heidegger's attempt to overcome them in last century has only produced the destruction of universalism. If we go back to Marx, we note that his certainty of equality was based on the characteristics of human species. This is the meaning of the German word Gattungswesen that he uses more often in his early works. The Gattungswesen, which Marx stressed in naturally social sense, is at the root of his mature concept of community as Gemeinwesen, as clearly stated on the Jewish question of 1843, in a strongly worded passage of another text of the same period, Critical Notes on the article The King of Prussia and Social Reform of 1844, Marx affirms that human nature is the true community of the man. Here is the quote. Where is the quote? Sorry. The quote is has disappeared. I don't find it anymore. Please help me. No, this is not mine. What is the, sorry? Oh, thank you very much. I prefer that you read by yourself the Marx quotation. Yes, the first one, okay. Okay. According to Jacques Camat, the Gemeinwesen is one of Marx's main themes. Apart from the early works, this question is central in the Grundrisse and is taken up in the 3-volume of Capital. It is also meaningful that Marx goes back to it in one of his last works, the so-called Marx Note on Adolf Wagner of 1881. As noted by Camat, here Marx in this time criticized Roberto's notion of social use value, in which he recognized the Ferdinand Tönnies concept of community as Gemeinschaft. This latter is linked to one particular people, so it's far from Marx. The Gemeinschaft, so is far from Marx's idea of Gemeinwesen as community with universal characteristics. As a matter of fact, although Tönnies was anti-Nazi, his Gemeinschaft will end up being reiterated by Nazis in the sense of a people-racial community, the German word Volksgemeinschaft. Unfortunately, it is this meaning of particular and close community, be it ethnic or cultural, that has increasingly infiltrated culture since the post-war period through Heidegger's ontology, as I meant before when speaking of communitarian movements and postmodern philosophy. Accordingly, the research on the Marxian idea of Gemeinwesen has been lost. Nowadays, as a result of a long interaction between these cultural issues and social matters, identity conflict seems to have replaced the class conflict in the Western societies that have solved the problem of primary survival needs. Actually, the identity issue goes beyond the material needs and rather falls into the psychic sphere, which expresses that human beings' intangible diversity, which, however, is just as real as their physical equality. This is the same psychic reality that, in 1837, the young Marx confided in his father that he wanted to find. Here is the quote. Oh, non è touch. Here is the quote. As far as I know, Marx then abandoned that research, but I think we need to resume it in order to carry out the task of equality and to deal with social conflicts in our time, as he tried to do in his time. What I mean is that materialism should evolve to include an understanding of the psychic human reality. In Marx's dream, Tom Rockmore writes that, I quote, "In Marx's theories, materialism seems to be unrelated to any philosophical claim about matter, hence unclear. It is perhaps best understood as a synonym for concrete." Well, it seems to me that this Marx position toward materialism was just linked to his youthful intention of finding the nature of the mind as necessary, concrete, and firmly established as that of physical nature, as he wrote to his father. A valuable contribution to continue that philosophical research may come from the theory of human birth of the Italian psychiatrist Massimo Fagioli, who was also a sophisticated thinker interested in the big socio-cultural issues. Fagioli was very impressed by the young Marx research of the Pearl of Pearls, commented in a long essay interview about philosophical subjects in 1980. His theory fits in that part, as it explained the biological dynamic by which, at the moment of birth, the newborn's immaterial mind emerges from the material reality of the fetus as a non-conscious capacity to imagine. This capacity makes us all equally human, as we are all equipped with the same non-conscious capacity to create, not only to reproduce, mental images full of sense. According to Fagioli, human body is mind and human mind is body, but without original splitting between consciousness and unconsciousness, or between verbal thought and thought through images, anyway out of any biological reductionism. So, human beings are born equal to become different over time, with the onset of the consciousness and the language articulation, but necessarily on the basis of that common and ontological foundation, which marks only one belonging, the one to the whole mankind. The human identity is originally social, as interhuman relationship is necessary to the newborn, both to survive and to develop itself in the twofold sense of satisfying one's material needs and realizing one's psychic requirements. The first psychophysical activity of the newborn is in fact turning towards another being similar to itself, that Fagioli called intuition hope that the breast exists. The human being whose natural development has not been interrupted or conditioned because of disappointing interhuman relationships, that is, in philosophical terms, the human being who has not been corrupted by society, according to Rousseau, or who is not alienated in Marxian terms, that human being dialecticizes its individuality in the relationship with the other. The subjectivity doesn't contradict the sociality. Quite the opposite, the understanding that the development of subjective identity goes through the relationship with the other, who is at the same time equal and different than me, could be the greatest weapon against violence. Moreover, since the mind-body splitting is not original, but it's only the consequence of a lacking development, the human being who has reached adulthood, preserving his human nature, will not hurl himself against the same nature from which he comes. He will modify it for his needs and requirements, but without the senseless devastation of which is capable the alienated man, that is the human being who has lost his material origin. So, the medical scientific vision of the human being that derives from Fagioli's discoveries has a great philosophical meaning. Notably, I believe that his theory can confirm the Marxian Gemeinwesen and can contribute to develop a new form of ecological humanistic materialism suitable for responding to the needs of human flourishing in the contemporary world. A considerable step in this research is the philosophical analysis of Fagioli's theory in order to work out if it can be useful to improve the understanding of human freedom in Marx's wake. At the present state of this analysis, it seems to me that freedom can no longer be conceived as freedom from the necessities, neither from a material point nor from a psychic point of view. As a matter of fact, freedom from necessities of material life would be contradict sociality, because it could be realized only by using the labor of a man in favor of another. At this regard, I'm wondering if the meaning of labor itself could change according to the Fagioli's major distinction between needs and requirements. That is, if labor could be understood not only in the sense of satisfaction of material needs, but also as a possible realization of psychic requirements. Marx expressed himself in the same direction in the text of 1944 named Comment on James Mill, in a great passage where he speaks about carrying out production as human beings. Here is the quote. getting back to freedom issue, neither can freedom be conceived as freedom from necessity of interhuman relationship. If it were, we would lose our human nature. Marx's conviction that the human nature is the true community of man is confirmed by Fagioli's theory of birth, according to which any individual realization is founded on a creative elaboration of relationship with the other. But exactly because of the great importance of relation for human flourishing, the comprehension of the social dynamics must include the psychic sphere. At this regard, by way of conclusion, I wish to mention another Fagioli's theory major point. Treating passions, he has discovered the existence of a kind of violence more radical than physical destruction. That is an unconscious mental activity of the complete disappearing of the image of the other as human being, as a result of what he called pulsion of annulment. On that basis, Fagioli has established a clear difference between denial and refusal, grounding on the first one the interhuman psychic violence, and on the second one the possibility of social transformation and emancipation. Considering that the major violent dynamic of annulment is alienated in the same sense with which Marx believed that alienation contradicts human nature as Gemeinwesen, the difference between denial and refusal can be useful in order to think about a new form of dialectic. To sum up in very few words, I think that some Fagioli's theory's essential elements could be useful in order to combine idealism with materialism. So, dear colleagues, I've come to the end of my speech, and I'm aware I proposed two big questions in too little time. But my intention was only to draw your attention to the necessity to resume the research of that pearl of pearls which the young Marx wanted to find, and to show you a possible new path to do it. That's why I'm convinced that understanding the nature of the mind as necessary, concrete, and firmly established as that of physical nature is the more important task, the real key element for learning to be human in this 21st century. Thank you.